This is the Surly Grognards for June 30th, 2014. Apparently I can talk. This is Peter Bowman.
These are lies and slander.
And that is, of course, Eric Carlson. How are you doing tonight, Eric?
I'm doing alright.
Awesome, man.
It's too hot, the planet sucks, but I have beer and tobacco and air conditioning. Air conditioning's the important part.
Wish I had beer, but I've got frosty cold water, so that'll have to do.
Well, that works nicely, too.
Yeah, it does, actually. So, we got one of... I was going through the questions for this week, because we have a few.
Hooray!
And one of them sparked the idea of a topic for me. So, I'm going to read the question.
Part of the reasons why we love these questions. Exactly.
But sometimes they'll spark good show topics, and this one I think is actually a really good one. This is from Marco Polaris, and he asks, he says that he's been browsing the Paizo forums a bit too much lately, and there's been a lot of talk on there about how weak rogues and fighters are compared to other classes. But that's not his actual question. His question comes down to some of the arguments he's seen recently. You see, there are a lot of people who think rogues and fighters are weak compared to existing options, which is probably true. And there's some of the people who seem to think that if you pick these classes, you're deliberately being stupid and hurting the party. If you have two options, and one of them is clearly better doing something, man, then why oh why would you ever pick the other option? No argument seems to satisfy. After all, because crunch and fluff do not have to be linked, then there is, by their reckoning, no excuse to make a suboptimal character. Classes, feats, or skill options that may complement the idea of your character but are not optimal are irrelevant, since anything can be role-played away and therefore shouldn't require character investment. How do you feel about this as a DM and as a player? Obviously, sometimes a build is just broken and not viable, and some concepts just don't work if you limit yourselves to the normal fluff of the game. But at the same time, not optimal isn't always the same thing as not playable, and some players have more fun picking feats and abilities that complement their character's backstory and flavor, rather than bending the fluff of optimal builds to fit their character. Because Paizo's forums are basically WotC forums redo, I witness a lot of what seems like bullying players and DMs who don't mind suboptimal builds. Telling people that their DMs are, quote, coddling the party or, quote, doing it wrong if they're having fun with terrible, obsolete classes. At the same time, my experience in 3rd edition was largely hypothetical, so maybe all the combat really is be the best or suck. So this brought up the topic to me of how important is balance in tabletop gaming?
Which is a really good question, honestly.
And, because there are a lot of games that answer that question in different ways. One of the ones I've mentioned before, Ars Magica, the balance between, quote, classes is non-existent. Playing a Magus, you are vastly more powerful than a companion, who is massively more powerful than a Grog. That said, every player character has a Magus, a couple of companions, and there's a group of Grogs that you shuffle out to the remaining players, depending on who's playing their Magus and who's playing that Magus' companions in a given adventure, and you rotate between them because it's a troop-style game. And then there's most point-based games solve the problem by giving everyone equal opportunity to pick whatever they want.
Right. And
trying to make sure that all the sort of general options are at least roughly balanced against each other. And then some class-based systems don't even really seem to try to balance their classes, and some do try very hard to make sure that they do.
Here's the thing, and I'm looking at this largely through a 3.5 lens because that's what spawned this. I'm guessing Pathfinder is effectively 3.75 has the similar problems that 3.5 does. And it's that, honestly, the martial classes just blow in the end game. I never felt like that wasn't a reason not to play them.
Right.
Particularly if you don't... The biggest problem with that is... you start to feel ineffective. You feel like a sidekick to the wizard. Or the cleric, or whatever. And that's the problem. But if you're cool doing that, awesome. And I don't see how. Here's the thing: part of the game master's job is to balance the encounters for the party.
Yep.
And that's his job. This doesn't let the game developers off the hook, though.
Nope.
At all. But yeah, I see no reason why you shouldn't play a suboptimal class if you didn't want to. go for it. Just make sure everyone knows what's going on.
Yeah.
As in all things.
Yeah, well, that's a given. But I do think balance actually is pretty important overall in terms of actually designing the game. And I can speak about it from the game master's point of view. And this happens in any type of game. And this is sort of my first point on this, is part of the problem with having a mix of an unbalanced party, where some classes are clearly more powerful than others, comes down to that actually balancing the encounters for the party. Because if you have when you have to plan around the optimal combat classes, you have to run this weird, and if you've got this mix of balance of power, things that will actually challenge the sort of the optimal over the the powerful classes might be so powerful that they'll just end up curb stopping the suboptimal guys.
Yes,
And
that is an issue.
And things that they'll find appropriately challenging will just be trivialized by the powerful characters. And that's the real problem with me that I had with 3.5. Once you get past a certain point, is the casting classes just trivialize anything that's a reasonable challenge for the fighters and the rogues and the rangers and such.
I also feel like any D&D I've ever played, all the editions always work better between levels 3 and 7. That seems to be the perfect level range to play D&D in.
Well, that's because they didn't playtest the higher level stuff until they actually got to 4.0.
Right.
Where they actually did heavily playtest Paragon, between 11 and 20.
Yeah, I've never played a high level 4th Ed.
From the little I played of it, it's actually pretty well balanced. Still, it gets wonky once it sort of breaks down once you get to epic tier, but that's fucking epic tier.
Right, where everything goes wonky. The end.
And
right.
The other thing is that it's So yeah, I don't know. The problem I have with what's the Paizo stuff, the stuff that he's talking about in the forums, is actually a problem in that there are different players get different things out of games, the same game, and a lot of people don't seem to recognize that. And so while it is entirely true that you can roleplay anything, and that power level and role playing have nothing to do with each other.
This is entirely true.
And so, I get very irritated with people who say that, building an optimized character means you're not interested in role-playing. Or that a character that's intentionally weaker is a better role-playing opportunity character.
I agree with you there, but there's a certain, what's the word I'm looking for? Certain mindset that goes with building a optimum character that tends to gravitate towards less roleplay. I game personally with most of the people I play with, honestly, can build a perfectly optimized character and roleplay their asses off. They're really good at both. So yeah.
Speaking of someone
played with a lot of people, someone who brings every point out of their character usually isn't as interested in the storytelling aspect of it.
I've not actually found that. Honestly, a lot of the players I've actually found who are more interested in the combat actually end up being the ones who, the ones who are, I've actually found a lot of people who I've gamed with who sort of try to intentionally build weaker characters so they're have better role playing opportunities, or they're better role playing characters, are often seem to be less actually interested in the story and role playing, and are more interested in sort of making themselves sort of the focal point of things because of how, of all their weird disadvantages that come up at weird play times.
There is a little bit of that too.
And my gut feeling honestly is
both
that
sides have their cardinal sins.
Oh God, yes, absolutely. And honestly, I think it just boils down to there are a lot of different people who want different things out of games, and
yeah, absolutely.
And because of that, I think you really do have to focus on balance, because you can always
a good developer will balance. It's not balance isn't nearly as important as it is in, say, a tabletop war game.
Oh God, no!
Looking at you, Games Workshop.
Oh my God!
But it's still very important for a role-playing game because no one wants to be the sidekick, or if they are, that's the character concept.
Right, and that's fine if you want to make that decision. But and I can understand from a sort of a simulationist standpoint if a particular game world magic is supposed to be more powerful than anything else, and that's what they did in Ars Magica, for instance.
Yeah, and the entire system is built around that concept, and giving everyone a chance to be Captain Destroy the City with a Whisper.
Right. And honestly, if you're playing an Ars Magica campaign, you really don't have to have everybody have, their own magus. You could have a few people have maguses, and then a bunch of people focus entirely on playing companions.
Actually, I wouldn't mind doing that. Actually,
Be interesting.
it might be kind of cool playing the put upon loyal lieutenant kind of deal.
And there are lots of different types.
That could be fun.
Absolutely.
I would like to play that actually.
Yeah, Ars Magic is a lot of work, though.
Yes.
Also, I
yes,
can't find my copy of the book.
I never owned one, but
I owned an old copy. I don't have the most recent edition, which is I think 5th now. Although you can get a PDF of the 4th edition for free off of Warehouse 23.
cool.
But balance. It's one of those tricky things, and sort of knowing how to balance things, and it's. I think it's more. I'm not sure what type of system it's actually most important in, because it's really important in both point based and in class based. Because in point based, it's
If something's underpointed, then everyone takes it. If something's overpointed, no one takes it.
right. And
it's pretty quick. And my experience with the point-based games, people pretty quickly gravitate towards the underpointed ability, and everyone takes it.
largely, yeah.
Fucking look at the Mutants Masterminds game. Almost everyone has eidetic memory.
Well, there's that. It also fit into most of those characters' concept. So.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it wouldn't have taken if I was playing like a Hulk type character.
Well, I mean, for instance, in the Mutants Masterminds game, Errant doesn't have it because it doesn't make any sense for him to have it.
Right.
Well, actually, you can see him having it, but it didn't fit Nick's way Nick envisioned the character.
Everyone else has it.
Well, no, Clutch doesn't have it either.
I thought he did.
Nope.
Oh, right, he's got the doctorate. Okay.
Right. So yeah, it's one of those things that I think balance actually really is important. But I keep looking at coming back to the I just find it interesting. I think it's sort of a symptom of the internet to a certain degree that when you have debates about this sort of thing, it does tend to get fairly polarized.
Oh yeah, and it's not just of the internet, but of forums in general. And by forums, I mean like a group of guys chatting at a gaming con.
Yeah, and I think part of it, though, is just the access to so much more information, and that means it's become much easier for the optimal builds to spread. And sort of more people have access to people who have done rigorous mathematical analysis of stuff.
And you see this in wargaming too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even in a relatively well-balanced system like War Machine and Hordes, there are optimal builds out there for factions, and they're out there, they're out in the ether, and everyone says, of course you take a Spriggan Indicator army, unless you're taking Beast 09 because he's a better Jack.
Right. Or a great example of this was back in the early days of Magic the Gathering. There was a long period. Tournaments were happening for a long time, and then eventually a website went up called the Dojo, where people would share deck builds, and then all of a sudden, like this cross-pollination of deck ideas started floating around, and within like a month, you started seeing vastly improved and more powerful decks showing up in those tournaments.
Yes.
And that's because there was just improved information flow and sharing of information. And that sort of thing has happened with role-playing games too, with the advent of more moving from like mailing lists to bulletin board systems to full-on forums. As that's moved along that sort of chain, the cross-pollination of ideas and what's an optimal build and what does X and Y, because anybody can sit down and run the math on this sort of thing, but most people really aren't willing to do it.
But there are those guys who will, and they'll post it on the internet for everyone to digest.
And then everyone can look at it and go, oh, that makes sense. I should try that.
Of course. Why didn't I say that before? Of course I can make an unkillable Dreadlord for my Dark Elf army.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, speaking as someone who's actually good at the math and actually and statistics and does this sort of thing, and used to do this sort of thing all the time, I'm actually pretty good at optimizing characters, and I enjoy doing it. But I also enjoy building wacky off the wall stuff, and I try to make it as effective as possible when I do so.
Right. Because why wouldn't you?
My problem is in games like any version of Dungeons & Dragons, honestly, past 2nd edition, so 3rd ed and 4th ed, is there are a lot of really interesting abilities and feats that are really cool flavor-wise, but are so suboptimal mechanically that it's really hard to justify taking them.
And I feel your pain there, because I don't do the math. I do what feels right. Usually that works out. But yeah, I mean, there are some things that I can't think of any examples off the top of my head. I'm like, that's fucking cool. I'm totally going to take that. No, wait, that really doesn't synergize well with anything else, now does it? It's kind of not good.
Well, it's like one of the few minor problems I have with Iron Kingdoms, for instance, is there are a lot of times when it'd be really nice to take a language, like learn an additional language, but the opportunity cost for taking one is so high.
Yes, this is very true. Like, I could learn Khadorn, or I could take Gunfighter and not have to worry about my hand weapon skill at all.
Right, and there's a lot of stuff like that, and it's like there's not a lot of stuff like that in Iron Kingdoms, for instance. Thank God, because they actually did a good job balancing it.
They're actually good at it, and they seem to really want languages to be a rare and special thing.
And that's fine, and I actually completely understand that. But I think you have to end up house ruling Iron Kingdoms if you want to have a multi-nation traveling game.
Yes,
because language barriers become too you either have to house rule, how you can get access to languages, or you have to change how different nations handle foreign languages, or establish something of a lingua franca for all everywhere,
or just hand wave the languages in general.
Right. Like for instance, like
I've come close to doing.
Yeah. Like for instance, like the classic D&D kind of thing of there is there's the common language which everybody has access to in 4th ed and 3rd ed and
2nd ed.
Right, because it's just assumed that you want the characters to be able to talk to most people.
Yes.
And that makes a lot of sense from a playing in the game situation. From a simulation standpoint, it doesn't really make much sense in that sort of a game world. Like, different nations will very likely have different languages. That's what happens in the real world.
Hell, there'll be different languages just in different areas of the same nation. I mean, look at Wales and London.
Right, absolutely. Well, they were different. They're different countries. I mean,
they're different countries, right? But they're on the same fucking island, within less than 100 miles of one another.
I know. But there is still a lingua franca in the UK, which is English.
Yes.
But that wasn't always the case. So yeah, you start looking at things like that, and whereas in something like a Starfighting science fiction game, there probably isn't a sort of intergalactic basic language just to facilitate trade,
or even just a goddamn universal translator.
Right, things along those lines.
Or translator microbes or something.
Right, and again, those are usually in there to make things easier for the players or the writers in the case of an actual story,
right?
Like a book or a TV show or what have you. And in those cases, having a communications barrier is a plot point.
Yes.
And I'm right now, like the games I'm running of Iron Kingdoms, I'm sort of trying to debate how I want to handle it, because I do want to send things outside of Ord at some point. And virtually none of the characters speak. Virtually none of the characters in either of the games, not enough of them speak either. Signarin or Katoran or what have you.
Yeah, and that's kind of the problem I ran into. I kind of came to the conclusion that Ordic was the general trade language out of convenience. So,
Right.
so you guys could do business.
Right.
But, like, I was thinking about, like, running a sort of investigative story in Corvus. And I realized, oh, I could just unrealistically have everyone speak Ordic. But that's dumb.
Right. And, and this is honestly a balance question right here. Because, again, we all have the opportunity, like, not all of us even have the opportunity to pick up an extra language because it's limited to some classes normally. Now, both you and I quickly realized that house rule said anybody could pick up a language when you could pick up an ability.
Yes. And even then, even with that house rule, it's still it's a big deal.
Yeah, because again, you're giving up shit like Gunfighter or additional points.
Or Shield Slam, or another spell.
Or, another spell. Let's see. I can either speak a language or be able to cast another spell.
Or I can invest further into, like, my great weapon skill. Yeah.
Or I can learn some, like, character-defining ability that, Shield Slam or Defender or Gunfighter or two-weapon fighting. Or, I forget the name of the ability, the Alchemist ability that gives the ability to get a free grenade throw at the start of each turn.
Oh, I think it's called Grenadier.
No, that's not Grenadier. That's the one that allows you to... But that's when you
start. That's when
to
pull the pin, right.
That's what gives you a quick action to pull... The free action, quick action to pull the pin. Which you start with.
Yeah.
So, yeah... And it's one of those weird little balance points. But and I think overall it's not a big deal because most IK games probably are going to stay in roughly their same area.
Yeah, you're not going to see a lot of people like going from Northern Kador all the way down to Seoul and then hanging out with Scorn and then maybe having French or some Gator men.
Right, exactly, because of the travel times, just if anything else. I mean,
yeah.
So, yeah, and if you're going to do that, the Game Master will come up with some way of working their way around it. But, and it's not that big a deal because everything else is well balanced, so...
Right.
Against each other. There are a few things that are... Like, Iron Kingdoms has a few things that I think are a little bit out of whack. Like, I do think that the Virtuoso ability for the skilled archetype is a little too good.
It's really strong. I haven't... You might be right. It might be a little too good.
On top of the fact... yeah, sorry, go on.
It's simply because every skilled character I've seen in the game so far fucking has it.
Yeah, well, Hannah doesn't have it yet in hers.
She's getting it because she's seen what Chris's character can do. Oh, of course I'm going to take that next.
But it's when that stacks on top of the fact you get an extra attack for being skilled. It's just like
plus 2 weapon fighting plus ambidextrous. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I look at that and I go, that's a bit of a minor balance point, but overall there's so much other really good stuff that it's not that big a deal. Yeah. So there's a step down from the optional choice, which is pretty much, if you're skilled, going to be Virtuoso for your main weapon.
Right.
That's a step down from that to the other stuff.
Isn't that big a step on?
It's not enough of a big... It's a big step, but everything is so effective that it doesn't hurt you that badly.
Right.
And in terms of raw power, like, skill beats out, say, intellectual in terms of raw combat power. For the individual character. I can say this flat out.
Right. Skill makes up for it by buffing everyone around them.
Yes! Intellectual does that very well.
Not skilled intellectual. Right.
Yeah, and that's the reason that my character is at all functional in that game.
Your character is invaluable.
Absolutely.
I mean, that group would not work together nearly as well without your intellectual alchemist bounty hunter.
I agree completely.
That's just in combat. Outside of combat, they'd all be busy. Those with noses would be busy picking them.
Yeah, well, yeah. But yeah, no, and as I said, it's just one of those things that I was getting to that, is that in terms of my ability to personally do stuff is not that great. I mean, I can do a few things that are helpful and effective, but I can't drop things anywhere near as quickly as anybody else in the group.
Um, Will's character doesn't drop things too quickly, but he's also a walking brick that pretty much dictates the flow of the battle.
Unless he decides to start spamming magic on top of his attacks,
That's true.
which he can do.
Which he can do. I just remembered that he can do that. I'm so used to him just going, nope, rock wall there, shield guard there, take it on the chin, whatever. And then I forget every once in a while he just like freaking rapid fires boulders at people.
Yep. Whereas I huck grenades around, but I have to be very careful of that because they're all area effect stuff and they're not party friendly.
Right. Well, I don't know. The freaking smoke grenades are really party friendly with so many people with Prowl in it.
Yeah, well, that's very helpful. But like, yeah. So at any rate, balance is kind of we're getting. But like having run 3.5 games and having watched what happens when the martial class when the game gets past level 7.
Yeah.
And watching as the martial classes, I mean, you start seeing them trailing off at about level 5, and then you hit like 7, and the casters start pulling ahead. But I mean, the big thing is like having played in one. I played a cleric in the first 3.0 game I ever was involved in. I was playing the party cleric,
right?
And I quickly realized that I was literally the only reason that I was not outclassed. I was not like as good in combat as the paladin in the party. Was because his stats were much better than mine because we were rolling stats. His combat stats were much better. He was significantly... He had an 18 strength. I had I think I was 16, and that difference was noticeable.
Right.
So that on top of that, he got his base attack was enough better that he was able to get to... get up to, he got multiple attacks before I did. Though that would change if I bothered. That all changed if I bothered memorizing buff spells for myself.
Right.
And mind you, in terms of the way I was playing the character, I made a conscious choice to use the buff spells on him.
Well, which makes a certain degree of sense because he's got the better stats and everything. But yeah, if you just wanted to be the selfish cleric and go crazy buzzsaw action, you probably would have been as good or better than him.
Well, the problem is that I almost never took the buffs. There's a self buff spell for clerics that is ridiculously good, and basically turns you into a full-fledged fighter. And I never bothered with it.
Which shouldn't exist, honestly.
Yeah, well,
it takes away from the utility of the fighter is what it does, and that's a balance issue.
That's my point.
Yeah,
but if I bothered memorizing, say, 2 bull strengths, I could throw one on the paladin, one on myself, and I was basically as good as he was in a fight, and I could cast spells.
Yeah,
and he could lay on hands and detect evil. At least he wasn't a fighter.
Yeah.
In which case, he wouldn't even have that.
Yeah, and so one of the things that really impressed me about Fourth was that it's got its balance issues just like any other game, but it's not nearly so noticeable.
Oh yeah. And honestly, some of the non-spellcasters were remarkably badass and were actually better than some of the spellcasters.
Warlord immediately springs to mind.
It's the best leader in the game.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, and I know people who will go... There are a lot of people who argue that the way they did is by making everybody into basically spellcasters. And to a degree, they're right. By giving everybody access to these, abilities that are not just, I roll a d20 and hit the guy with my sword.
Right.
And, they complain about how the Warlord is healing people by shouting at them, but...
Well, there's a certain degree of abstraction involved.
Well, there's a lot of abstractions. There always has been.
Dude, hit points are not a real thing.
That's the whole explanation, which has been around since basic freaking D&D, is that hit points are an abstraction, and that when you are hit by an attack, it's not representing the fact that someone's dealt one single sword blow to you. This is a result of an exchange of blows and how worn down you are.
Yes.
And people forget that all the time. I forget it when I'm playing D&D sometimes.
I forget it all the time also.
But in Fourth,
and all games do that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Except maybe Rollmaster or anyone else, completely dependent on the whole crit system.
Yeah, GURPS does it too to a degree, because of how few hit points you have in GURPS.
Right.
And the fact that you take serious penalties to all your skills when you're actually wounded.
Mm.
which are doubled if you have low pain threshold. I say for no particular reason. Yeah, so fourth ed does have balance point issues, and every game has them. Nobody's going to get a perfectly balanced game. It doesn't happen.
It's impossible, but doesn't mean it's not an ideal you should
Well, no, it's actually very possible. You just have everything be exactly the same,
which isn't fun.
Well, it's not actually balanced. Since there's nothing to there is one thing. One thing cannot balance with itself.
Yes, that's true.
You need to have two different things to balance. If in terms of game balance, they have to be different to balance them against each other. Because yes, a 1 kilogram weight is balanced with another 1 kilogram weight because they're the same thing.
Right.
But yeah, I'm just sort of sitting here looking at I keep going back. I'm looking again at Marco Polaris's little thing here, and he's mentioning the fact that telling people that their DMs are coddling the party or quote doing it wrong if you're having fun with some quote terrible obsolete classes. And I'm going to say this right now: if your party's having fun with suboptimal builds, guess what? You're doing it right.
Yeah.
If your party is having fun with optimal cheese powerhouse monkey builds, guess what? You're doing it right. Do you know why? The phrase is "you're having fun" is there.
You're having fun. That's the point. It is a game.
That's the whole fucking point of this: is to have fucking fun.
And this is a role playing. What's more, this is a role playing game. This isn't something competitive.
Yeah, I know. And so the question is, the biggest problem, as I said, honestly, is from the game master seat, making sure that things are challenging and fun for everybody in the party. And if there's a disparity in balance, and some people are playing optimized combat characters, and some people are playing suboptimal characters, it makes it hard for the game master to balance that. Because again, as I said, occasionally that will lead to the situation where it's either too easy for the optimized guys and they trivialize it, or it's challenging for them and the non-optimized guys are sitting there floundering and possibly dying without meaning to.
Yes.
And that can happen in a point-based game too. I've had it happen when I was running a Champions game, where one player had built a character that was significantly more powerful and optimized than the rest of the party, and we didn't realize how bad it was until I set up an encounter to challenge him, and I realized that the baddies that they were fighting were capable of just flattening everybody else in the party, and without him, that would have happened. The best part of that, though, is the player of the overpowered character. That night when everyone got home, sent me email saying, "I have to tone this character down."
And that's awesome.
Because that was the realization that, he said, I've been feeling like I designed this character a bit too optimally before this, and he's like, and because all the choices he'd made were done intentionally for flavor reasons, weirdly.
I've done this myself, honestly.
And so, he had all sorts of weird limitations, and he was using a variable power pool because he was a wizard, and, he had all this stuff, and he's like, and it just turned out that all the various limitations I put were ideal point breaks that meant that I just had access to more power than anybody else. And I've got to find a way to limit that. So we did, and the character was much more balanced, and the game worked much better after that.
Yeah, and I've done that. Usually with a new system, I've just purely building for character reasons, built a super optimized death machine. I've also done the opposite.
Yeah, I've done that too.
Where I made a flounder and quadriplegic gimp trying to clench a dagger between his teeth.
So yeah, it's it's a hard thing finding that balance point, but when you can, it's fantastic. It's great when you can actually see a mix of, and again, there are times when especially in a game like GURPS, a lot of the sci-fi games that we've done, there have been plenty of characters who are not directly useful in combat, but are so useful in other situations.
The Doctor immediately springs to mind.
Yeah, and she actually would occasionally use her non-combat things to go with really crazy combat stuff.
Which was all the skill science was so useful.
It was. Oh, and like my character in the when Chris took over, Bob was.
Oh yeah,
Bob. I was by and far the least useful combatant.
I remember several fights where you hid under a table.
Well,
That was your turn.
I did have racial combat paralysis because my species
Right.
was not are they just tended to freeze up in combat. It was part of their whole sort of survival trait when they were But he was a social monster.
Yeah, he completely outclassed the captain, who was before our social go-to guy, largely because the captain wasn't nearly as cultured or good at his job as he thought he was.
And that was an intentional thing on your part.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean and that can work fine as long as, and honestly, will not work for every game. Like it worked in that game because I was perfectly okay with not being useful in combat.
Right.
And I knew it wouldn't hurt the party because I knew that there were enough other
Because
characters.
you knew how combat focused we tend to get sometimes.
Right, and I figured, okay, I can let the combat things slide. I had a few things I could do in combat if need be. Mostly looking more dangerous than I actually am.
Right. Gotta make myself look big.
Like, my character was actually remarkably good at fast draw.
Yeah.
I think I had the highest fast draw skill in the party.
Yes. Which you used several times to stop a fight before it started.
It's like, no, a gun just appears in my hand. And I immediately start making bluff rolls.
The opposite of this, though, for me was in the much the lurching undead monstrosity that was the Rogue Trader game.
Yeah.
Where I'm playing a space orc because you can't show me the candy and not let me eat it.
Right.
But the orc freebooter career in that is just, it's all about combat. That's all it does.
Right.
Rogue Trader's not a very combat heavy game.
Right.
So there are many sessions would go by where my character would be sitting there drooling, trying to fit random things in the room in his mouth. And then fighting would happen, and I was the only one actually able to stand up to whatever we were fighting.
Right.
And it was part of the problem. I should not have played an orc. I realize that now.
Right. Or picked a different career than the freebooter.
It was the only one. It's the only one available for orcs, unfortunately.
That's bad design.
Yes, I agree.
Wait, me criticizing a Fantasy Flight RPG? Shocking.
Never happens. Never.
They do a lot of things really well, but they occasionally get things like that so
but
wrong.
The base Rogue Trader is actually a pretty damn good game. It's just that both the Recruit Mercenary and the Orc Freebooter, they're completely focused on combat, just two different styles of doing combat. And Rogue Trader is largely a game about exploring and speculative trading, with sometimes fighting.
Right.
So your Orc and Recruit are busy sitting there betting out who could fit whatever that thing is in their mouth faster, while the Rogue Trader is actually negotiating the deal.
Right. And that can work, but the Game Master has to plan around it a lot. And
yeah, and the part of the problem was, while we're familiar with Dark Heresy, we weren't Rogue Trader, despite having the same base rules, is a very different beast in general.
Right.
So, yeah. There are a lot of things that we weren't prepared for, and that game lasted much longer than it should have for...
Right. So I think that pretty much covers what we're going to talk about for balance. I mean...
Yeah.
So, the question is, how important is it? It's important, but it's not, I mean...
It's not the end-all, be-all.
It's the thing you have to focus on first in game design, in my opinion, as I said before.
Yeah.
But, perfect balance is not something you're going to achieve, but you should strive for it. And,
it's an ideal to live up to, not an actual goal you're ever going to attain.
But I think the really important lesson in all of this is remembering that different people do get different things out of the same game, and different people's play styles are not inherent. Like, the fact that someone likes playing less powerful characters is not wrong. But it might mean that they're in the wrong group. Not every player will mesh perfectly with every group. Even if
This
it's
is true.
I've got some friends who I love dearly. They're great friends. I don't roleplay with them. Because we have very, very different opinions on what a good game is.
Yeah, fair enough. And like, yeah, back to 3.5 slash Pathfinder. You'll almost always finding me playing, stubbornly playing a fighter or rogue or something like that in those games. Because God damn it, they're supposed to be good. I'm going to find a way, even though I'm going to fail.
Right. Whereas I've given up on that if I'm playing, and I'll play a caster of some sort. Probably a hybrid caster melee combatant because I like doing. I think I like that character concept to begin with.
Yeah, it's a cool one.
I mean, it's like, yes, the healing cleric who's good in a fight, I really like. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I tried to do that in the first edition game. It doesn't work nearly as well.
No, because clerics really sucked for the second edition.
Yes, they do.
They so overcompensated in 3.0. Oh, God. All right, on to questions, because we are going to remember to do them this week.
Yes, we are. God damn it.
The first one is from Skycake on the forums. He says, "Hi, my group and we're talking about running a game where the players are politicians / ambassadors / etc. There wouldn't really be any combat, and the focus would be on roleplay and political maneuvering. Is there any system you think would do this well, or should I try to make my own? Any thoughts would be appreciated." Okay. Honestly, you could do this in basically any system.
Yes.
However,
you're going to want to do a system that has really well-defined skill system.
I'd agree with that. Honestly, I would avoid most class-based systems.
Yeah.
Systems that have like careers and stuff, that works better. Like some Iron Kingdoms, you could do something like that in Iron Kingdoms if you wanted to. And it would work okay.
Yeah.
It would work pretty well. Because there are a lot of non-combat focused careers in there. And you can do a lot of interesting combinations, like, with aristocrats and what have you. It depends also on the genre, what sort of, other genre you're gluing onto that. Like, a political fantasy game world is very different than a modern political game world, which will be different from a sci-fi political game world. And will want different systems, depending on what you're doing. As a default, honestly, my first recommendation would be GURPS.
Yeah, I'd have to say that.
That's my default, and it's not just because I'm a big proponent of GURPS. I'm a proponent of it. I think it's a good system, but it does skills so well. It's the heart and soul of GURPS.
Yeah.
And honestly, its skill system is better than its combat system.
Yeah.
So that is where I would go. But there are a bunch of other ones that would actually work pretty well. Basically, if you look for games that'll have strong skill systems, don't really worry much about the combat system there. But I'd also generally lean more towards a point-based system than a class system.
Believe it or not, the old White Wolf games would actually do that pretty damn well.
Yeah, actually, they would. They do it reasonably well.
As much as everyone tried to do combat with them, they really weren't made for combat.
That's the thing, they were never intended to be combat games.
Yeah.
That was the whole point of Vampire the Masquerade. Is it was supposed to be a political game, as was Werewolf.
Yep.
The problem is that you're playing werewolves, and there's a strong temptation to be, but I'm a werewolf.
Just bite its fucking head off.
And that's supposed to be an interesting dichotomy for the actual sort of characters. You got this sort of the whole point of the thing is the political negotiation stuff within the clans, but you're a werewolf and you could just rip their heads off.
Yes. Or in one ill-fated vampire / werewolf game, blow up the vampire stronghold.
You've told me about that one before.
Yeah. Don't bring a ratkin into a vampire game. That's all I'm going to say.
Alrighty. All right, going over to we have a few other questions here. I think we asked that one. This is from Jacob. Hi guys, let's go straight at the biscuits. I'm running my first game since way too long ago, but so far it's going pretty well. I'm currently planning a more action-packed sequence and realized 3 things. 1. Challenging fights. My player characters are not very good fighters. How that happened with a dwarf and a Viking, I don't know. But it puts me in a situation that I have to give them not too powerful enemies. I'm no good at concept making the fights a fair challenge. Still have to make some sense context wise. Any ideas?
This is something I struggle with whenever I run a game. It always takes me about like 7 or 8 sessions to figure out a good balance for a challenging fight for the team.
Right. Honestly, my general rule of thumb, especially if you're not especially if you haven't run a game for a while and aren't like completely 100% knowledge of the system, aim low early and build up gradually.
Yeah.
In terms of power of the enemies, just so because it's the problem is if you go aim too high, you might just accidentally kill the player characters.
Yes.
And that's harder to adjust from, shall we say.
Now you're all zombies.
Yeah, honestly, making the fights a fair challenge still makes sense context-wise. The other thing you have to remember is you're the game master. You can adjust the stats of the bad guys down, make them weaker.
You can fudge the bad guys all you want.
Just make the bad guys that you want to use less powerful. And the player characters won't know. Remember, you're their eyes and ears, so so if you for instance, if you let's just say Dungeons and Dragons as an example, 4th edition, and say you want them to be fighting my campaign right now is set up for them to be fighting these powerful hobgoblins and such, but the hobgoblins are too powerful for the party as they stand, because the player character are level 1 or something like that. But you really don't want to be using from a flavor standpoint kobolds and goblins or what have you. You could just make the hobgoblins less powerful. Reduce their stats. They're still hobgoblins. You describe them as looking like hobgoblins. They act like hobgoblins in combat. They fight in a disciplined, regimented style. Your descriptions are all hobgoblin-y stuff. Mechanically, they are different than what they are written up as, but that doesn't matter. So, because as long as the encounter is fair and reasonably balanced and is challenging at an appropriate level, as long as your descriptions are matching what you want the player characters to see and experience, it'll be fine. At least that's my experience. Refluffing is one of my favorite things to do. On multiple occasions, I've taken stats for a monster and basically said, okay, this undead thing does things in this way. If I change the flavor of the way things work and to say it is a kobold, it's a kobold, and the players will never know. As long as I change the flavor of it. Like, I'm still doing necrotic damage, and it's not affected by things that would affect kobolds because it's undead. I remove that bit from it because,
right.
Yeah. His second question in the email is constructing scares. The action sequence I mentioned is in the beginning revolves around the players escaping a haunted mine, presumably running for their lives. I want to build up tension and scare them in the process, but I'm unsure what to do. If it helps, the mine is haunted by a corrupted earth elemental that will attack with all kinds of hazards imaginable in the mine, like falling boulders, leaking gas pockets, crystal spears, etc. What would you recommend to make it scary?
All right, this is tough, because it's all about atmosphere.
Yep.
It's all about painting that picture. My recommendation: watch some horror movies. Mm-hmm. Try to get that feel, that sort of feel. I mean, you're escaping from a haunted mine, so it's dark. Everything echoes weirdly in there. You can't see much beyond the pale glow of your torches. Right. And shadows seem to move weirdly, even if they're not. Yep. Because the players are all fucked up on adrenaline and fear response. So they're going to be seeing shit that's not necessarily there, even without a supernatural element involved.
Yep.
And play up that kind of shit.
Absolutely. And, not just horror, like things that, watch suspense stuff also.
Yes.
Honestly,
yes.
Watch
some fucking Hitchcock.
Right. And honestly, rewatch the scene in the temple in Raiders of the Lost Ark when Indy is at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
Where he's going through all the traps and such. There's a lot of tension in that scene that is actually and you've got all the things like the scenes you can see dead bodies here and there that are encased in spider webs and give them little warnings, little noises here and there, to warn them about something bad about to happen. Stuff like that. Eric's completely right. It's all about atmosphere, description, and remember, you're their eyes and ears, so what you tell them is, what they see. And if they, and so you're gonna have to play be a little bit misleading, but make sure that they know this is all in good fun, and you're not trying to
fuck them.
Right. You're not trying to screw them over. You're trying to make things atmospheric. All right, his third question in here is, I'm having a bit of a problem coming with NPCs that have goals and aims that help the campaign to move along. In the beginning it worked out okay, but at the moment I'm blanking a bit. Can you tell me any tricks to come up with NPCs that have good and plausible motivations? Honestly, read lots of fiction in the genre you're running. Watch movies. Watch TV shows. Steal character ideas, left and right. Motivational ideas.
We steal whole characters.
Yeah.
Like, change the name and make him an elf. The end. Not that I haven't done that.
Dude, I do this all the fucking time.
Yeah, same here.
There is no shame in stealing a character ideas.
In the Iron Kingdoms game I was running on Tuesdays, you guys are being chased by the Grey Lords. I had this whole narrative in my head about the Grey Lords basically being James Bond trying to chase down the dangerous terrorists. I couldn't. I failed at bringing that to the fore to the characters.
But that's not crucial.
That was their goal, and you guys still don't know what was actually going on.
But... No, we don't, and that's fine. The big thing is that the motivation. We don't need to know. We don't need to know all the motivations immediately.
Right.
So and if we eventually find it out, great. Although most of those Grey Lords are dead at this point, I believe. I think one of them got away alive, but badly beaten up.
The one who led the Doom Reavers survived. I think the other two are dead.
I believe that is correct. That's what I remember. So he may be holding.
I think Grigori is alive, but Markov and Victor are both dead.
And so Grigori may be holding a grudge against us at some point.
Maybe a little one.
Since we beat him up and made him lose his staff, and his two buddies are dead.
And the other two members of his Turnion are dead.
So yeah.
But he won't be back.
No, of course not. That would never happen.
That would never happen.
So hope we answered those questions for you. Moving on. We got one from Raxus, also.
Aha.
I was wondering what your guys' reactions tend to be when the players say something along the lines of, we should buy a boat. I'll explain why that's why I laughed at that in a moment. This question generally covers, what do you do when the players want to buy something big like personal transport, castle, secret base, illegal war machine, etc.? Do you let them buy or make something like that if it fits the type of game, or you decide to steer them away from the idea if you know it won't come in any handy anytime soon? And then do you let them purchase something like that straight from a source book, or do you sit down with them to help them design something, or do you trust them and let them design the whole thing into a couple of details? For example, I've been wondering about your sci-fi pirate space pirates game that was mentioned a few times. Did you all work together designing the initial ship together, or did you give them initial floor plan and then they gradually customize the ship throughout the game? If you other examples that you and other players are deciding to buy, make or steal something along those lines. Yours sincerely, Raxus. Okay, as to the space pirates game. Okay, so here's the thing with that.
The boat was actually another character. It was an NPC. Our ship in that case.
Their ship in question is one they stole. They had a ship
that was just an aggressive form of salvage.
Right. So what happened was this crew had a technically functional broken down prison transport that they didn't want because it was a piece of crap. What Eric's character was a pirate captain, and one of the other pirate characters was his first mate. They were all escaping prisoners. Well, except for the doctor,
who probably should have been.
Yeah, actually, and technically, Leon's character was a stowaway, but
right.
So they saw this much better looking ship at the spaceport that was fairly high tech, and they decided we want that. So they stole it because I set it up there for them to steal.
I had no idea. That wasn't obvious at all. That was clearly supposed to be the ship we were going to steal.
No idea what you're talking about. And so I gave them rough descriptions of what the ship was, and then the players and I did work together on laying out the actual eventual details of the ship. I gave them rough details on it, but I personally didn't do the floor plans or anything like that because that is not the sort of thing I'm good at.
And Chris actually did that.
Right.
And we came up and we'd say, does the ship have a med bay on it? Sure. Does it have these other facilities? Sure. What about this? No, but you could probably add that on if you wanted to. Too much time at dry dock, we'll skip it. That kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I had ideas of what it was, but I didn't want to lay out the floor plans because it's not my strength. Right. And it turns out one of the players of the group is good at that sort of thing. So he decided to start doing it. I was like, go with it, Chris. Because he's more interested in that sort of thing than I am, and I'm more than happy to share the burden of world building. But as to sort of, the whole wanting to acquire stuff like that, if it won't come in handy anytime soon, let them know that.
Yeah.
Or change your plans and make it come in handy. If they really want to have a boat, come up with a reason for them to have a boat.
Well, the reason why it was funny is because all the players agreed they wanted a boat in my Iron Kingdoms game. So I built an entire story arc around them being on a boat that they're eventually paid with because their employer gets dicked over.
Right. And that was cool.
Now you guys have a boat.
Right, and we wanted a boat because we wanted to have the option of having a mobile base of operations.
Yes.
Because
and
we're
I thought that would be
mercenaries.
cool. So but I couldn't find any rules for what the cost of such a boat would be, or so I decided to do it via story-wise. So I said, I'll figure something out for you guys, and then I sent them on an adventure, which rewarded them with a boat.
And as an aside, that's a really good way to do it. I almost stood up and applauded when he paid us with the boat, Eric. I just want to say this right now, because that is entirely the right way to handle that whole situation. It's like,
thank you.
Because it's like, well, we don't know how much a boat should cost in this game. Fuck it, I'll make it part of the payment for an adventure, and they won't know it's coming until they get it. It's perfect. It's how you handle. It's the classic way to handle giving the players a ship in Star Wars.
Exactly. Yeah.
For instance, double bonus points if they can be in debt to a crime lord when getting it also. Because that's always a fun story arc.
It is. No, you guys just have someone in the Grey Lords with a grudge against you.
Which is why we spent time trying to disguise the ship. Because we're not, at least I'm not stupid. I'm not sure the other players would have thought of that.
I don't think they would have either.
They would have thought of it.
I know Chris was thinking of it, but didn't mention it because his character doesn't think.
I was about to correct myself. The other players might have thought of it, but none of their characters would have.
Yeah, because, well, they're not necessarily that bright.
No, my character's by and far the smartest in the group in that campaign.
Well, you're the intellectual archetype.
On top of that, I also have the highest intellect. But
yeah,
it's a really interesting group. The group dynamic is interesting, shall we say?
Yeah.
Because my character gets along with Chris's character and Will's character, and not so much the other two.
Right.
And Chris's character gets along with basically everybody.
Well, Chris is playing a particularly amiable cutter, so he is the friendliest assassin you will ever meet.
Yeah, and his character's sort of moving away from actually being an assassin.
Yeah.
Because he's decided, yeah,
killing people for money. Well, killing people for money is one thing, but when that's all you're doing, then that kind of puts a downer on things.
Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, if the game system has rules for actually buying a boat or a castle or what have you, and they want it, as long as you can make sure that it's at least, I'm trying to think of the right word for it, at least relevant in some way at times.
Right.
It's fine. In a suit like the Mutants and Masterminds game, I gave them a base because they're superheroes. They should have a fucking base.
Yeah, we have a base.
And there are some strings attached to it. Sort of.
Yeah, I keep on waiting for those to come up.
Well, they sort of have. They force you guys to actually work, you know, with the work with the law enforcement agencies. That was the whole point.
That's true. Yeah.
You would not have been recruited had you guys not been willing to work with law enforcement.
I was more thinking about like Dr. Knight pulling some shenanigans and having the base held hostage against our cooperation.
Dr. Knight would never do that. He's a good guy.
Of course he is.
Dr. Knight himself is a perfectly good guy. Whether someone else will use Dr. Knight to hold it against you in that way, that's an entirely different story. Like, I know for a fact you guys have actually gone to help him out, partially because you guys owe him.
Yeah. Well, at least in the good doctor's case, it's because it was the right fucking thing to do.
Well, yes.
Like the doctor is utterly guileless. This did not occur to him. It's entirely me.
Yeah. At any rate, so yeah, so you know, things like that are. I do like giving players things like that because it makes them more invested in the world.
Yes.
And when they want to buy something extravagant, that's great. If they want to buy an illegal war machine, well, if it's the right type of campaign, sure, why not?
Sure, what could go wrong?
You know, like the Mech Warrior game. I gave you guys a free dropship.
You did, actually.
Uh-huh. And it was an amazing dropship, wasn't it, when you first got it?
Yes.
And by amazing, I mean, oh my god, this thing's a piece of crap in a lot of ways.
Yes.
It was a converted merchantman.
Yeah, it was basically... It was called the Barn for a reason. It was built about as sturdily.
It had a crappy artillery piece in the nose.
Yep, which we threw out for an arrow for.
Yeah, well, that's because that was the right move to do once you had the resources to do it.
And we ended up turning it into the centerpiece of our prefab fortress that we drop in the middle of nowhere.
But you couldn't do combat drops. We
couldn't do combat drops.
So, yeah. It's definitely one of the things that you do have. My gut feeling is basically you're going to have to work with the party to make sure that it's appropriate for the game. Like, if the party wants to buy a boat in a game where you never intended them for them to need a boat in any way, shape, or form, like, the whole point of the game is that it was going to be city-based investigations, talk with them about that. If they still want the boat and have the money for it, sure, just let them know that it probably won't be that useful. But if they're really excited about the boat and having a boat, find a way to make it useful at least once or twice.
Yeah. Like, maybe they have to go out to an otherwise uninhabited island because something hinky is going out there and on out there. Like, and thus the boat that they just spent all of their resources on, it's now useful. It gets them to the island.
Right. So I hope that answers your question, Raxus. And I think that's it for questions, unless I'm missing one. Hang on a second. Yeah, I think that's all of them. If I missed one, I'm sorry. I'll try to come back. I'll try to come back to it at some point. If I missed a question, let me know, and I'll try to come back to it next time. But I think that's going to do it for Grognards today.
I think so.
Basically everything we wanted to cover tonight. Long story short, balance is important, but having fun is more important than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, balance certainly has its place in an RPG, and needs to be addressed. But yeah, if you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, that's the big thing.
Everyone's got to have fun, and balance doesn't necessarily have to be a part of that.
My biggest, if you're playing with people who you are really more interested in optimal party design, and that's not your inclination, give it a shot with the more optimized characters, just to see whether it'll make things more enjoyable for you too. And as a general rule of thumb, I would recommend, even if you're playing something a bit wacky and off the wall, trying to make sure it's still effective is a good idea anyways.
Yes.
But yeah, like telling people they're doing it wrong if they're having fun,
that's dumb.
They're wrong. They're just wrong. You're not like, honestly, if a group is having a lot of fun in 3.0 or 3.5 or Pathfinder, what have you, with basically primarily all martial group, and they're underpowered for what they can't pay, what most people consider be powerful enough for that sort of thing. If everybody's still having fun, who the fuck cares?
Right, and that's what's important. Everyone's got to have fun.
Right. At the same time, a group of players all playing optimized characters, if they're having fun, they're doing it right too. And and again, I will stand by the statement: fully optimized character is still a perfectly optimal way to roleplay, and to actually roleplay with it, because you can.
Absolutely.
And I also will say flat out that a badly designed game is still a badly designed game, even if it be house rolled to be fixed, because that still means the designer's still fucked up.
Yes, absolutely.
But that's it for Grognards today. We'll be back next week, same bad time, same bad channel, which is, of course, we record every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern here on twitch.tv/MechaGM. If you want to email us, if you want to ask us questions, which we try to answer at the end of each show, you can email them to us. Our email address is surlygrognards@yahoo.com. Or you can hit us up on the forums, which you can find at mechagm.forumer.com. Both places are also good places to send in show topic suggestions, which we adore. Because that means we don't have
really do.
Yeah, because it means we have to do less work for us, which is great. But I mean, if there's something you really want to see us talk about, we do want to know about it, because we do want to talk about things that you guys will find useful or entertaining. And if you've got criticisms for us, send them to us. We love getting that stuff, because it means we can make the show better. You can also, if you keep an eye on my Twitter account, which is at MechaGM, I post there when the show's about to go live, and if we have to delay or anything like that. So keep an eye on that. Again, my Twitter handle is at MechaGM. You can ask me questions there too. I'll be happy to answer them if I can. Also, you can find previous recordings of the show on my blog, which you can find at mechagm.blogspot.com. I think that's everything.
I think that is everything. I think we're square.
Sweet. And that's it for this week. So, hope you all enjoyed the show, and we'll see you guys soon. Until we see you guys next, though, be happy, be safe, keep on gaming, and we'll see you guys soon.
Bye, humans.